This is Get Behind Me Jesus FAQs. Instead of doing an entire podcast that's just me talking about myself, sharing my story, or, trying to fill the space with something, I thought that I would break it up into smaller segments to give you an idea of who I am, what my story is, and why all of this is happening. So, with the assistance of AI, came up with a pretty decent list of questions. So we'll start with those. I grew up Catholic. I spent 8 years in Catholic school. And at the age of 11, I really wanted to be a Catholic priest. So much that I took to wearing around a robe that my grandmother had made for me for a Christmas play. So I was always there at the church on Saturdays, and we would get rid of the missalette. The missalette is the booklet that has the singing and the psalms and the scripture readings for that season. Every, 3-4 weeks, we would switch out those missalettes. But I would keep a copy, and I would take that home with me. And I would practice singing the songs, and I would read the scriptures, and I would try to focus my time and energy in prayer. And that was at 11 years old. So in the 6th grade, at 13, so just a few years later, I asked my religion professor a question. Not professor. She was a teacher. She probably wasn't qualified to teach religion. I asked my religion teacher a question, and that question was very important to me because my grandfather had recently passed away. My question was whether or not my grandfather would remember me in heaven. And long story short, her answer was completely inadequate. And that was the first time that I remember thinking that what I was being taught couldn't be true. I don't think I had any major issues with the theology or with the church itself, but I definitely had the very strong sense at that age that certain people just didn't know what the hell they were talking about and probably shouldn't be speaking on behalf of the church. So flash forward to high school, we got involved in the Church of the Nazarene because it turns out that our across the street neighbor was a pastor of the little church on the corner, and he had made friends with us. His dogs frequently escaped. We would take his dogs back to him. He would strike up conversation with us. He eventually made his way across the street to introduce himself to my parents, and then he and my dad began having conversations. He's really good at evangelizing, really good at sharing what the church was all about, what his beliefs were, and my parents happened to be looking for something a little different. So right around the same time that I was thinking about different faith experiences and whether or not the door would open for me to pursue some of those, because my Catholic career was pretty much over. I wasn't going to Catholic high school. My grades weren't good enough to get me into the private prep schools, so I couldn't pursue that legacy like I thought I wanted to. And I had a lot more questions over the intervening years, a lot more questions about my faith. And so I had been sort of deconstructing and transitioning myself. My parents kind of were as well, and they were looking for another place to get plugged in. So we got involved in the Church of the Nazarene. After 15 years in the Nazarene Church, it became very clear that I was not welcome, that my ideas were not welcome. This all culminated over the support and ministry to queer folks, specifically queer college students at the Conservative Christian University where I attended and worked. I was asked to be a sponsor of a queer group, and I was ecstatic to do that. I foolishly thought that I could do that in conjunction with my ministry at the church, and that bridging the gap between those two things was a natural step. My senior pastor disagreed with me. He happened to be the chair of the ordination committee, and so he unilaterally decided that I would not be ordained. and that my theology was too much at odds with the denomination for me to continue in ministry. Suggested that I take a break and that I find a place to get involved where I could rethink my faith. Well, I did rethink my faith. And eventually, because of that and some other events around the same time, in the opportunity to leave. And I took it. My wife and I became the facilities manager and the head chef at a Christian camp. We had always been in love with camping ministry. That's where we met. That's where we fell in love. That's where we got married. And so we thought that Christian camping ministry was something that we could do that was far enough removed from the drama and the hypocrisy, really, of contextual congregational ministry. So we moved to Washington. That's actually the picture behind me. That was the view outside our front window. That's what we could see every day. So the place where we ended up was beautiful, and we were engaged in the work of making sacred space for people. And we loved that. We loved that idea. Unfortunately, we very quickly found out that certain people who were responsible for this place had a grudge against the person that had hired us. Unfortunately, we wound up in the middle of drama that wound up getting him fired. So he and his family had to leave this place, which meant that I myself and my wife, as the head chef, wound up running this place for the summer. And it was the busiest, most miserable summer of our lives. And that was because of the mismanagement and because of how everything had unfolded, very unchristian things going on. And all of this in the midst of dealing with very, very deep trauma from our own experiences prior to arriving there. Not only did we have my experience to reconcile, but as soon as we moved there, we had learned that our children were sexually assaulted by a family friend. So we were dealing with all kinds of trauma. And then the church heaped more trauma on top of that because good Christian people had vendettas to settle against each other that wound up leaving us holding the bag. So that time in Washington was bittersweet. We did have some time to do some incredible things. We were in an incredible place, but the church left a bad taste in our mouths. We were violated. Our lives were destroyed. And the community that we thought that we had back home turns out was no community at all. Some of our friends didn't even realize that we had moved. Nobody contacted us. Nobody came to see us. Nobody was interested once we had left the church. We were feeling utterly alone. And on top of that, all of us questioning, who is this God that would let this happen to us? Who is this God that could stand by when we need some divine intervention, some divine revelation? Who is the kind of God that would abandon us the way that these people abandon us, that would allow us to go through this hurt and suffering the way that the church that we thought we could trust and that we had given 15 years of our lives in service to? We didn't want to believe in a God like that. We stopped believing in a God like that. But that left us with a lot of questions about where to go from there, about what was next, and about who we were outside of the place where we had given so much time and energy. So that's my experience with Christianity. In the midst of that massive deconstruction, different podcasts became important to me. Reading different things became important to me. exposing myself to ideas other than Christianity, exploring more about world religions and different ideas, especially atheism. These all became a part of my spiritual but not religious journey. The reason why it was a spiritual, not religious journey is because I wasn't willing to give up my sense that something bigger than me was out there. My hope that there was some order to intersect the chaos. My hope that good and ultimately love was the thing that drove all of this. Those ideas are part of who I am. I can't remember who said it. An atheist is a faithful person or a spiritual person who's lost hope. And I don't know that checks out, but at the time, for me, that became something that I wrestled with, was whether or not I was letting go of my hope, whether or not I was walking away from these ideas that I had held for so long. I think ultimately the way that idea resolved itself is that an atheist is a spiritual person who's lost confidence in other people. Because that's really what it came down to. The church was no church. Christians were not Christ-like. Gandhi said that he had no problems with Christianity, but every time he encountered a Christian, it became problematic for him. So the idea is there's always been this conflict, this contrast between the ideas of what Christianity is all about, what it supposedly upholds, and the way that the people behave. Now, I don't blame Christians. That's true in a variety of ways in every circle. So the quest isn't, finding something better than Christianity. The quest is to be a better person myself. And that is a spiritual journey. So that is my experience with the spiritual, not religious world. And that is what I want to explore with my guests. And that's what I hope resonates deeply with you and helps you to understand that there is safe space out there. There is sacred space out there where you can explore this and figure out what's best for you. So check out Get Behind Me, Jesus. The stories and the teachings about Jesus in the scripture are fundamentally different than the Jesus that is introduced in most churches in America and, frankly, in various places all over the world. But even if you're not interested in those stories and teachings about Jesus, there's something here for you because I'm on the same journey. And I hope that we can explore those things together. And I welcome you here. And I thank you for being here.